Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Another YouTube live show tonight. Welcome in. John Kurtz with you. A day late, a buck short. You know the deal, but there's too much going on, man. I couldn't just ignore this midweek show, especially because I'm going on vacation this weekend. So, barring any kind of major news, you won't be hearing from me on Sunday. But I mean, look, judging by this being college athletics and everything that's swirling around right now, who the hell knows? It could happen. But here's what we have today. I feel the tide turning, ladies and gentlemen. Now, whether or not that means that the Big Ten and the SEC are going to have to ultimately back down from their playoff proposal, I don't know. But publicly, there seems to be a real shift in how people are treating the SEC and the Big Ten when it comes to the playoff. And maybe even more broadly speaking here, I have talked about this. Everybody's sensing the importance of the moment. And I feel like we're seeing that come through. There have been some negative pieces written about the SEC this week. Certainly Twitter, public opinion seems to be really calling out the SEC and Big Ten quite a bit this week. And now another thing that we have is Brett Yormark and the Big 12 getting unified behind the 5+11 playoff model, which has just come bursting onto the scene out of nowhere. This is not something that was being discussed much before this week, but now it feels like this may have a real shot to become your next college football playoff format. And there's even a mention from Ross Dellinger this week about, could we just have to delay a decision on the 26 playoff, like kick the can down the road and do another 12-team playoff in 26 and delay any decision until 27? Crazy. That means things are happening, people. It's not turning into just the SEC cakewalking into what it is that they want exactly. So we're going to talk about all that. That's basically what I have planned for the entire show today. I know I should have done a better job at getting into the Big 12 mini schedule release that came out today. There were like TV times and info on 40 different games, predominantly non-con games going on in the Big 12. So if you got questions about that, certainly hit me up and we can get into that. I also am realizing that I did not check John-Kurtz-4 on Venmo if you want to submit a question or comment that way. If you are not catching the show live, that is the way to do that. But no, we are good. Obviously, fill up the comments here. As you do that, you can submit a super chat by clicking the $ below the chat box. That will attach a donation to your chat, ensures that it gets read here on the show tonight. So that is your way to communicate with me and be a legit part of the show. Appreciate all of you guys who do that. The Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. Got another one hot off the presses that is going to be going out tomorrow morning. OFBnews.com. That's OFBnews.com to subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. Man, it's been going like crazy. We are up to 4,300 Big 12 fans who read the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter twice a week, straight to your inbox, totally free. I take these big picture stories that are happening in college athletics and break it down to how it matters to the Big 12, how it's going to affect your school and your conference, plus all the news and notes that matter around the conference. So highly encourage that, especially if you are somebody that supports the content that I do. That would be great. Again, OFBnews.com there. All right. You guys ready? You guys ready to get off and running here? Okay. Let's do it. This 5+11 model, 5 auto bids for the 4 power conferences, plus a group of 6, and then 11 at-large spots is really gaining steam. And the Big 12 has been unified behind this. It's a bad thing in some ways for the Big 12, so why would they be pushing it? Let's dive in. And how big is the impact that the Big 12 seems to be making right now? Lots of quotes, lots of tweets coming out today from people. It still seems to be like SEC spring meetings. There's been this slow trickle of information coming out there and quotes coming out of there, many of which are very, very whiny. The Big 12, it's been a much different tone. It's been this unified front. Clearly, everybody is behind, hey, we want to push for the 5+11 model, which you could better brand this thing as the earn it model. This is the earn it college football playoff model, saying we are not going to do this auto bid stuff. We are not going to just do this as an invitational. We are not going to just award every single year certain slots to certain conferences. We don't need that. What we need is we need you to earn this, okay? You need to earn your way in. So here's one tweet today. Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark told me today his league not only approves of a 5+11 model, it presented, let's see, not only approves of a 5+11 model, it presented it. So the Big 12 presented it when the Power 4 commissioners met recently in Charlotte. So the Big 12 has been behind this. It is pushing it, the 5+11 model. Quote from Brett Yormark: "It has always been our first choice. It's fair and rewards on-field performance. Always been our first choice. The Big 12 is the one that presented this when Power 4 commissioners met recently in Charlotte. So don't get it twisted. The Big 12 is behind this. The Big 12 really wants to push this 5+11 at-large model in the college football playoff. Now, there's also a part of this Brett Yormark quote where he said, "I'm not surprised SEC coaches like it," which is interesting there. The SEC at large would prefer the 4 auto bids because it allows them to unlock all those different things. 9-game conference schedule, scheduling agreement with the Big Ten, extra play-in games at the end of the year to go along with a conference championship game. All of that stuff, which helps them with money. And that's, from an administrative standpoint, that's what like your athletic directors are going to be thinking of. Like, we need the money to make this happen. But it is interesting to say, hey, the coaches may actually prefer this 11 at-large thing. I would think you would. Like, this is the weird part about this battle. I can explain it to you, and I just did, like why the Big 12 is pushing for 5+11 and why the SEC is pushing for the other one. But it is like this twisted inverse reality of what you would think on the surface makes sense more for each league. Because the Big 12, I mean, look, guys, this contract going until the early 2030s, like the next 6 years, the Big 12 will not get 12 total teams in the college football playoff over the next 6 years, with this being the rule, this being how it is decided. That just will not happen. The 4-4-2-2-1, the Big 12 would get 12 teams. That is a guarantee. Probably not anymore, but they would get 12 teams. So why would the Big 12 be pushing for the one where they get fewer? Well, it's because the Big 12 doesn't want to codify. They don't want to sign on the dotted line, solidify that they are literally half of the Big Ten and the SEC. That's a big part. They're also, I think, doing this a bit in an altruistic sense for the greater good of the game. Don't want to see the game turn into something where we are acquiescing to the Big Ten and SEC being able to start tipping the dominoes down where they just solidify their monopoly that they have over everything. A lot of reasons not to do it, but it is weird. Meanwhile, the SEC, like, hey, 5+11, the more at-large spots there are, the better it is going to be for the SEC and the Big Ten, but particularly the SEC. I know they can whine all they want about what happened last year, but that is the one time in the history of the playoff and really in the history of any kind of postseason system that the sport has had in the last 20 years that it has not overwhelmingly benefited the SEC. They're generally going to do better with more at-larges. So why are they fighting against it? Well, like I said, they want they want a guarantee of how many spots they have so they can do all these other things that they believe will make them more money. It's a very weird state that we are in right now, but that is the reality. Here's another quote from Brett Yormark. This was to The Athletic. He said, quote, "I don't think 4-4-2-2 is fair. I just don't think that model speaks to who we are as a conference and what we mean to college football." Now, interesting quote. That to me is kind of like a PR sort of quote, because he is saying, like, I don't think us signing up to be half of the Big Ten and SEC is like what we are as a conference. But if you're talking about just sheer how many bids you would get in the playoff every single year, I mean, again, that I think is a pretty good deal. But you can't say that. If you're Brett Yormark, you got to position yourself as like, we're going to fight, man. We're going to fight for being worth more than that and trying to aspirationally get to a level where we are better than just that, better than just being a conference that gets 2 teams in because we are half of those other leagues. When I say that everybody in the Big 12 seems to be very unified, here is what I mean. Here's a quote from Mark Harlan. Okay, now remember, guys, who is Mark Harlan? Mark Harlan is the athletic director at Utah. What do we know about Utah? Utah has been very prickly about where they sit in the Big 12. There have been a lot of issues, okay, between Big 12 fans and Utah fans and how they feel about being in this conference. There have also been issues between Mark Harlan publicly slamming the Big 12 like he did after the BYU football game last year. He said, like, we were happy about being in this conference. We are not now. I'm paraphrasing. It was something to that effect. This is the guy, Mark Harlan, Utah athletic director Mark Harlan. He's on board with preaching one consistent narrative here. He says, quote, "I think the public and we agree that you have to win this thing on the field. So Brett Yormark has his ducks in a row, man. He's got the athletic directors, even down to the one that has been a little difficult to corral and sometimes unruly. He's got that guy on message. That's good work. That's good work. As a PR professional, let me tell you, Mr. Yormark, that is good work. Here's Brett Yormark's philosophy on why. He expands a little bit more on this. Quote, and that's okay because we've got to earn it on the field. I often tell my room, you're rewarded when you perform at the highest levels. We are investing at a high level in this conference and we'll continue to invest. I'm willing to earn it on the field, and so are my coaches and ADs. So he's basically saying, like, guys, putting this out there is better for us because aspirationally now it means like we've got to go. We can't just rest on, hey, we're going to get 2 bids. We got to go get them. We got to go invest in this sport as much as invest in, well, yeah, this sports in general, invest in it all as much as we can. Whether that means, hey, you guys need to be open to private equity and private capital because, oh, by the way, Ross Dellinger has reported the SEC is teaming up with Goldman Sachs. So, yeah, we better figure something out if we're going to remain competitive there. I better get some buy-in from you guys on that. Or if we're going to go to the Jamie Pollard comments from the other day, Iowa State's athletic director, who said, like, we've got to either be subsidized by the university or have students pay a fee, or we're going to be Northern Iowa. Well, universities, maybe pay attention here. You're probably going to have to help subsidize some of these schools a little bit to continue paying rev share at the highest level to remain competitive here. To me, that's some of what this is about as well. It's like taking away the safety net from behind you. You're going to have to go earn more bids other than just the one if you want to be respected as a conference. And I would again say, like, in a world where Greg Sankey is complaining about saying, like, I don't need to be lectured on doing something for the good of the sport and whatever. The Big 12 and the ACC have done something, I think, pretty altruistic twice now in a week, where, yes, there is the part of this that's like, hey, don't sign on the dotted line that you are half of these conferences. But there is also the fact that, like I just mentioned, for the betterment of the game and everybody involved and fans, like, this is what we want to see. We don't want auto bids. We don't want it to turn into an invitational. Well, what just happened a week ago? For the 2025 playoff, the Big 12 and the ACC literally just basically purely for the greater good of the sport gave up likely automatic buys in the playoff. Like, they gave up any real legitimate shot. The Big 12 certainly did of an automatic buy in the playoff. And the only reason I say the Big 12 certainly did, the ACC maybe not. The ACC is going to have Clemson starting this year in the top 5. They will have enough juice preseason and recently, from a historic standpoint, that they could, I'm sure, earn a bye. I don't think any Big 12 team, even if they go undefeated, maybe if Oklahoma State went unbeaten and smacked Oregon in the non-con, like, maybe, but it'd be tough to get a bye. They're just forfeiting that for the greater good of the sport. And that was the statement coming out of it. And that's what triggered Sankey to make the comments that he did. Now, I was a little frustrated with that because I think, like, look how the SEC just leverages every damn thing that they have. The Big 10 leverages every damn thing that they have. I would prefer that the Big 12 just go ahead and do that, but they didn't because they are trying to make some moves for the greater good of the sport. Seems a little bit naive to me if you think, like, hey, we start doing that, we start setting that precedent, Big 10 and SEC will follow. I would say it's naive in light of the comments that we then saw from Greg Sankey about this. I don't need to be lectured about the greater good of the game, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah, I don't think you're going to get that kind of buy-in necessarily from the Big 10 or the SEC, but I guess I can say we should appreciate this in a world where nobody, and I mean nobody, seems to be acting in an altruistic sense for the greater good of the sport, the greater good of this thing that we all care about so deeply. I mean, the Big 12 is doing that. You should appreciate that about your league. The Big 12 is doing that. And the ACC as well, to maybe a slightly lesser extent, but the ACC is doing that too. They are. So thank you. Thank you to them for that. Now, here is one of the interesting tidbits. I do want to mention this real quick. This was from one of the stories that came out about all of this hubbub with the playoff. What happens if the Big Ten and the SEC can't agree on a new format before a December deadline set by ESPN? That is unclear, but perhaps the status quo, 12 teams with 5 conference champs and 7 at-large spots, could be back in play for 2026, with the SEC still playing an 8-game league schedule. Even Greg Sankey said, sure, I can see a scenario, but is that the most likely scenario? Come back for more. That was Greg Sankey's quote about this. But he even is admitting, like, yeah, that may be on the table. So that starts to tell you here that we're maybe not as close to being locked into the 4 auto bid thing as we thought. There's a lot of interesting positioning here. I mean, it feels like the SEC, and particularly Greg Sankey, they want to gradually mold this thing to where they can gradually get to their real monopoly here, do it gradually enough that they're not taking too much blowback. It's like a measurement of what can we pull off with how much blowback will we get with, do we risk antitrust suits and people in Congress coming after us and all this. You kind of weigh all that and you want to get there to the point where you really are the evil guy, but you don't want to be treated like it. And there's a lot of positioning like that going on right now. So as everybody is jockeying for position, the Big 12 at least has come out unified and seemingly with the ACC right there in tow. I mean, the ACC had all their stuff from spring meetings a couple of weeks ago where they came out, and I spoke about that. I was surprised how staunchly they came out against what the SEC and the Big Ten were trying to pitch. So it does seem like everybody is kind of locked in arms there. And I know John Wilner, who has come on this channel before, Wilner Hotline, covers football on the West Coast as well as anybody. He had mentioned that, like, Big 12 and the ACC should absolutely just link up, join together, because you need as much of that as you can to fight what's going on with the SEC. So anyway, some thoughts there. Let's check in with Michael. What's up, Michael? Michael, been a bit, long-time listener, not first-timer. Yes, indeed. Michael, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you, as always, my friend. It is great to see you. Great to see you. Has been a minute. Michael says, hopefully Yormark can steer the rankings metrics. Well, boy, I tell you what, speaking of trying to steer things, the SEC sent out a entire packet, a breakdown, I guess probably a PDF. I saw printed versions of it, but the SEC was handing out all this data about Massey rankings, and they are so incensed. They are so incensed by 1 year not getting aggressively preferential treatment from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee that they are going nuts about what needs to happen with the selection committee moving forward. But I do think actually there is something that is positive in that for where this all could be headed. And I will get to that in just a moment here. But appreciate you, Michael. If you guys want to join the show like Michael, click the $ below the chat box to submit a super chat. Ensures that you make it on tonight, ensures your question or comment gets on, and just a great way to support the show. So I appreciate all of you who do that. Okay. Now, setting the table with this discussion about a 5+11 format, we move to this. So as resigned as I have been for so long about, hey, the Big Ten and the SEC, they're going to get their 4 auto bids. Like, they've got the power. They're going to do it. It does actually seem like the ACC and the Big 12 and Notre Dame, by the way, on the same team, they have a chance to win this battle. I'm not saying it's overwhelmingly likely, but I think there's at least a chance. I am open to it where I was not before. I think a lot has changed here in the last few days, and a lot of this proof, I just mentioned a Greg Sankey quote, a lot of this proof comes in an otherwise kind of unsuspecting Greg Sankey quote. That is the tell here as to where this could be going, okay? So I mentioned, we talked at the top about the clearly concerted effort from the Big 12 to start pushing this 5+11 model. 5 auto bids, Power 4 conference title or champions, Group of 6 conference champion, 11 at large. Nobody had really heard of this until the last couple of days. Now there seems to be a really united front trying to push it. So then we get this tweet. Greg Sankey, this is from Ross Dellinger. Greg Sankey is laying the groundwork for a serious change to the College Football Selection Committee's criteria. Describing his conference as, quote, get ready for this, everybody. Describing his conference as, quote, not like any other. And its schedule, quote, stands alone. Thank you for that, Greg Sankey. But then, boy, there is this quote. This is the one that's frustrating. If we're just breaking this down and looking at what happened last year on its head, this is the quote from Greg Sankey. Quote, I do think there is a need for change. How do you explain some of the decisions made? And I assume when he says that, he means decisions like leaving Alabama and Ole Miss out of the playoff and putting SMU in instead, or, maybe that's a reference still to Indiana, whoever it is that the SEC wants to complain about. Well, if we're going to deconstruct this on face value, first of all, what a whiny statement. Second of all, it's crazy that they're making this much of a push about it. Kalen DeBoer was also complaining, Alabama head coach, about the schedule. And like DeBoer, the ball's on DeBoer to inherit the absolute machine that Nick Saban had put together, and then to lose by 21 at Oklahoma, who, by the way, Big 12 11th place finisher Houston lost by 4 at Oklahoma last year. Lose by 21 at Oklahoma, trail an entire game against Vandy and lose that, and then come here and complain about, oh, well, look at what our schedule was. We should have got better treatment. Shut up. Shut up. You can't do that, dude. You inherited a freaking Maserati and you crashed it a little bit. Just deal with it. Just deal with it. Don't complain that the sign was there. You ran into it. All right, buddy. I'm sorry. Anyway, so that's what I would say to Sankey. How do I explain some of those decisions made? Well, Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. Do I need to say any more? They also lost at Florida, who was playing better by the end of the year, but that's basically a 500 team. Lost to 7-6 Vandy, Alabama did, and they got clocked by 6-7 Oklahoma. Like, what are we? That's how you explain it, Greg Sankey. You don't get blanket coverage for how good your league has been for the last 20 years in a given year. This is a case-by-case basis, okay? But, there is something more to this, I think, than just Greg Sankey being a whiner. And Ross Dellinger from Yahoo pointed that out. And remember, Ross Dellinger is not somebody who is just going to say something to say something. Okay? Dellinger is as informed as literally anybody that is doing anything in the college sports world. Okay? Now, he says, such an intense argument from Sankey speaks to just how seriously the SEC is considering the 5 automatic qualifier plus 11 at-large format instead of the 4-4-2-2-1 model that virtually eliminates the selection committee's role. That is interesting. Okay, so what Ross Dellinger means by that is like, look, they would not be devoting this much time and energy into pushing their narrative to a selection committee if they knew or thought that it was only going to be for one more year. If it was just going to be for this next year, and then after that, they're getting 4 auto bids, they wouldn't worry about this as much. They wouldn't have to have this full-on attack in the media and put out graphs and diagrams and charts and data. They wouldn't be doing that if they just thought, well, it won't really matter because we'll get 4 teams in every year anyway after next year. This is hey, this might actually be something that sticks around for a little while. The idea of a selection committee to a bunch of at-large spots. We better campaign as hard as we can right now to try and lay the groundwork for getting better treatment in the future. That I thought was a really astute point by Ross, and probably an informed point. He's a smart, very sharp dude. So it very well could have just been something that he recognized on his own. But my hunch would be that there is some intelligence behind that because of how much he knows and how many people he talks to. Now, I mentioned some of these charts and graphs, right? You guys want to see some of this? Thanks to Brett McMurphy, we've got a little bit of this. So let me share my screen with you. Typical Zoom call dialogue, right? Okay. Let's get to this. SEC provided a 7-page document to the media showing the regular season gauntlet that SEC teams face in league play. The SEC says no other conference has a regular season as grueling as the SEC's. All right, so here you go. The SEC only has 2 teams outside the top 50 in average strength of record over the past 10 years. You can see where the Big 12 sits there. Look at the Big 12. Hey, better than the ACC. Better than the ACC. So there's that. They're using strength of record, only 2 teams outside the top 50. Everybody else has more. And then we've got the SEC only has 2 teams outside the top 50 in the average Massey rating. Just one of the many computer rankings that you will see. Meanwhile, look at the Big 12. Look at the Big 12 ahead of the Big 10 there. Maybe this is all about a case for, Big 12 getting as many teams in as the Big 10. I realize that the number 6 is less and the percentage is more. I understand. They're right there. Point being with the Big 10. But this is the data that the SEC is trying to use. And frankly, I get the point that they're making with this, but I found that to be a little bit underwhelming. I thought they might have something a little better than just that for the data that they were going to throw out there so strongly, with such a strong feeling about where they sit in the college football landscape. Again, it just comes back to like, guys, you got to do this on a case by case basis. And look, you have been rewarded for your strength of schedule time and again. Like, ask people in Tallahassee about the SEC being rewarded for its schedule. Alabama was not last year, but the year before. Greg Sankey had a quote like, we've made this about being unbeaten as opposed to strength of schedule. No, Greg, literally in the 2023 football season, Florida State went unbeaten and got left out because your Alabama team that had a loss got in. What are we doing? What are we doing? It's just 1 year. The SEC's lost its mind a little bit, but it is a good sign that they are losing their mind as much collectively, because it does lend you to, as Dellinger mentions, thinking, okay, they must actually be resigned to the fact that the committee could be here to stay for a while. And that's been one of the ideas that's been kicked around for a while by the SEC and Big Ten, is like, how do we just get rid of a committee entirely? We don't need a committee at all to deal with any of this. All it does is kind of get in our way. Let's not worry about that. So that may be another piece of this. So they're showing like, hey, computer rankings wise, like we'd be covered no matter what. More hypothetical wins, yada, yada, yada. So we'll see what happens with this format, man. We'll see what happens with this format, but it feels to me like 5+11 has a real shot. And what's funny is like the Big Ten, the only conference you're hearing like no talking out of right now is the Big Ten. They're the ones who have thrown their unified support really behind the 4-4-2-2-1. And this is where Tony Petitti really does not do Greg Sankey any favors by just not speaking. Like, he doesn't have to take any of the arrows because Sankey will go speak. Petitti really doesn't speak. He just kind of gets out there and it's like, oh, I'll let Sankey do it. He's been around college athletics longer than me. Have fun, buddy. Sankey doesn't really seem to like this very much at all. So anyway, now I had somebody ask me, I did a radio hit locally here in Kansas City yesterday, and somebody asked me, like, what do you think is the best playoff format? I thought that was a really interesting and funny question, because like my answer was, well, I would go with the playoff format that they have, but I would go back to the conferences like they were in 2020 and before Texas and Oklahoma left. Like, just turn back the clock, put the conferences back to where they were when they decided on that playoff format, and call it good. I think that's a really good way to do it. Now you have 5 legitimate Power 5 leagues that are balanced, and you reward the top 4 conference champions out of there with a bye. That seems to make a lot of sense to me. I would do it that way. And this is why it's frustrating that, it's like nobody could see this coming when the SEC went and got Texas and Oklahoma. Like, this was always going to be the end result here. And now we're here because of what the SEC did. And yet the SEC is turning around like, man, we got to fix this format. This is terrible. Well, you guys came up with it, but then you screwed it up by going and raiding the Big 12, which led to the Big 10 raiding the Pac-12 and then completely blowing up the entire conference. You guys, you did this. It is very much, for anybody who is too online, like myself, you've seen the meme of one guy pulling the trigger and shooting something, and then the next thing turns around and is like, why did so-and-so do this? It's like the SEC turning around and shooting the college football playoff format and then looking around and like, why would the Big 12 and ACC do this? Or why would the Big 12 and the Group of 6 do this? Like, that's what we have right now. So anyway, it's a bit of a mess. But the good news is the public sentiment seems to be turning on this. And I'm going to get to that after I hop into some super chats here. So appreciate all of you guys who are here. If you want to join the parade of super chats, click the $ below the chat box to do so. Make sure you're subscribing to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, ofbnews.com, or click the link in the description of this video. Got a new one coming out tomorrow. We've got 4,300 plus Big 12 fans reading right now. It is great. Appreciate all the people that have jumped in here lately to Open for Business. And like the video, subscribe to the channel. All of that really helps. Plus on Venmo, John-Kurtz-4, you can contribute there. Drop in a question or comment, and I will read it to kick off the next show. Eddie Lozano. What's up, Eddie? Eddie Lozano, San Antonio Real Estate. You guys know the drill. If you need a real estate agent in San Antonio, check out my guy, Eddie Lozano. Hi, buddy. Need to go 3 each for the Power 4. Okay. So Eddie's proposal here is 3 teams each in the Power 4. One from the American, one from the Mountain West, one from the Pac-12, Notre Dame. Number 3v4 playing conference, each Power 4 instead of championship game. All right. So he wants the play-in spot. Keep the money. No bias toward any conference. All right, that's interesting. So it is still turning into, this is kind of like you're kind of bridging the gap between the two, Eddie, where you're saying, hey, we are going to do it invitational style, but it's going to be equal for all these different conferences as opposed to skewed toward the Big Ten and the SEC. I do think it seems like most people now would shut it down because they would be like, no, we need to keep it about earning it on the field. Be one of those top teams that gets an at-large spot. We're not going to automatically reward a conference every single year when they may not have the best team. We don't know how this is all going to play out. We don't know what the future holds. We don't know how this will go. But that's an interesting one, Eddie. I'll give you that for ingenuity. Like I have not seen one like this yet. I think the rest of Group of 6 would definitely be upset about this. Everybody outside the Mountain West and the AAC. But I see what you're doing there, and that they are obviously the 2 most prominent leagues there. And then I guess, Pac-12 too. That's being pretty gracious to the Pac-12 to grant them a spot as well. But I love the creativity, Eddie. Love the creativity there, and certainly Big 12 having 3 spots compared to the SEC and the Big 10 having 3 spots would be great. Would be great. And boy, would they would hate this, because only 3 spots and then 0 chance of at large. I guess there would be 1 maybe, because this would be contingent on Notre Dame being ranked that highly, but essentially taking away all the at-large spots from the Big Ten and SEC. Michael, what's up, Michael? All right, throwing a super sticker out there. Appreciate you, Michael. I see you. Was there a message that went with this that I'm just missing? Doesn't look like it. All right, Michael, just being a good dude. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate you, my man. Eddie, what's up, Eddie? Again, Eddie Lozano, San Antonio Real Estate. Even in the NFL, there have been times the NFC has won 10 in a row and the AFC has had its turn. Let it be one on the field, because if you keep the ranking system, too much regional bias toward the Big Ten and the SEC. Well, it is a little bit toward the point that I was just mentioning of like, you never know how this is going to play out. Like, we think we know, and we think the SEC will continue to be dominant. But I think everybody would have thought that this year, and that's just not what the league was, right? So sometimes it does not work out the way that you think it is going to. We'll see how some of the dynamics could change in these conferences. Does Texas Tech, I'm just throwing this out there as a theory, but they've got the multi-billionaire backing them right now in Cody Campbell, okay? If you really can buy your way into the playoff, does Texas Tech just start doing that now and becoming a power? If they make the playoff for the next 6 years, win a couple of games in there, how much does that change the landscape and how we feel about everything, right? Like, these things can happen. So we don't truly know. So I get the point that you're making there, Eddie. I do, and I really appreciate your support of the channel. Now, I know like SEC and Big Ten folks would be like, well, yeah, but I mean, you're not going to win titles. It's too tall of a task. I would generally, yes, agree with you. Okay. But we have seen crazier things happen, and we also don't know how all this stuff is going to change, man. There are a ton of variables. And the Big 12 does have somebody right in President Trump's pocket. So you never know where that could lead and what kind of change could happen in the college game because of that. Let's just wait and see. Let's wait and see. Alan, what's going on, Alan? Appreciate you being here, my man. Thank you. Alan says, John, with the 5+11 model, at least mediocre Penn State, Iowa, and Ole Miss won't get auto bids. Rock Chalk Jayhawk Allen. That's a good point. I like what you're doing there, Alan, and like putting names to faces, basically, if you understand that analogy. Like, instead of just, hey, we're talking about 4 auto bids for the Big Ten or the SEC, this is putting actual teams behind those. Because like Iowa, Pat Forty, I'm going to talk more about him in a moment. But Sports Illustrated's Pat Forty did a great job where he was like, oh, get excited, people. This playoff format means more playoff bids for Iowa football. Like, they would be right there, smack dab in these playing games a lot of different years. And for the Big Ten in particular, some of those games, it was like one of them I think would have been Ohio State, Iowa in a playing game this past year. Like, not a good game, dude. I mean, Ohio State's going to roll them. And at least like Ole Miss and Penn State, I can respect a little bit more because I think they have higher highs than Iowa. But the Iowas, like Wisconsin's of the world, I mean, that's kind of the tier you're talking about of the Big Ten of teams that could make it there. Last year in the SEC, you're right. Last year's Ole Miss, I mean, they were 9-3, guys. Like Alabama, like that was a pretty mediocre team. That was not a great team. They've got the brand value. They've got the stuff on the side of the helmet. They've got that SEC patch. But if we're talking about what they actually were on the field, they were not that good. And these are the types of teams we would be talking about just automatically having a door open into the playoff every single year. So I think that's an important thing that you're doing there, Alan, in making us realize like what teams we are talking about here that would just be guaranteed access to the playoff every single year because of the fact that there would be 4 auto bids. So I like that, Alan. Thank you. Now, what I just mentioned there is Pat 40 and some public sentiment, even from national media, really starting to flip. Everyone has really rightfully right now turned on the Big Ten and the SEC. I think you are absolutely seeing that in the way the college football public at large, i.e. college football fans are reacting, the way that college football media is reacting, certainly, and even Congress, right? We have congressional, perhaps presidential pushback on some of what is happening right now. The only problem with all that is it may be too late. It may be too late. So let me explain here. The SEC, as I said, has done just a ton of whining, man. A ton of whining in light of their spring meetings and just having a microphone in front of them. I mentioned Kalen DeBoer. Here's Kalen DeBoer on being left out of last year's college football playoff. Quote, "You wonder what would have happened if other people would have played our schedule." Okay, well, this is where I will once again remind you all that Houston played at Oklahoma. Houston finished 11th in the Big 12. Houston lost by 4, 16-12 at Oklahoma. Alabama played at Oklahoma. Kalen DeBoer is complaining about his schedule. Alabama played at Oklahoma. They lost 24-3. They lost by 21 in Norman. Okay, so let's just chill on that a little bit. All right, if the 11th place team in the Big 12, who was a little frisky, but generally an afterthought this year, can handle Oklahoma that much better than you and Norman, maybe you should back off that comment a little bit, particularly when you just took over Nick Saban's program. Literally the best program we've basically ever seen in college football. Here's a Greg Sankey quote. SEC's Greg Sankey said, in the current college football playoff format, quote, "It's clear that not losing is more important than playing quality opponents." Well, again, this is an asinine statement because did you watch the 2023 college football playoff selection show when unbeaten Florida State was left out for an Alabama team with a loss? And it was because of strength of schedule. Yes, I know you're going to say, well, there was an injury too, John. Okay, whatever. If that were an unbeaten SEC team that had a quarterback injury, they would have gotten in because the SEC does get the respect for its strength of schedule. It was just for 1 year, they didn't get an aggressively over-the-top amount of respect. It was an appropriate amount of respect for what the conference was last year. Here's Greg Sankey, quote, "I don't lecture others about the good of the game and coordinating press releases about the good of the game, okay? You can issue your press statement, but I'm actually looking for ideas to move us forward." Okay, Sankey. Okay, buddy. Meanwhile, the Big 12 and ACC do make a couple of moves in the interest of the good of the game, by the way, within the past week. You do not care about the good of the game, Greg Sankey. That much is very true. And everybody is on to you now. Everybody is on to you. And it's particularly infuriating to hear Sankey whine about this. Like he thinks nobody should be upset about the things that he is doing for the sport. Like, dude, just embrace it. You are the Darth Vader of the sport. Understand that. You're going to have to take that. You're going to take criticism from people. That's the deal, man. That's the deal. Here's even LSU Athletic Director Scott Woodward. "I do have grave concerns about where this is going and what's going to happen, even within our conference and even within the Power Four. Where and how does this thing evolutionize?" Nice word. "And what do we turn into?" It doesn't really seem like many people in your conference, including yourself, Scott, really have that much concern because of the way that you are acting. All right. That one made me laugh a little bit more so than pointing out it's whining. But there's a lot of whining coming out of the SEC. And it seems like the national media has finally wised up to this. I'm happy they have. Ari Wasserman has been taking the SEC to task ever since it was, like December and we were debating playoff bids. He continues to go down that road. Pat Forty wrote not one, but 2 columns for Sports Illustrated this week about Greg Sankey, how ridiculous it is that he seems like offended that people would criticize anything he's doing. He tore down their playoff proposal and how stupid it is. And then we had this from Stuart Mandel. Now, I know that Stuart Mandel is a polarizing figure around here, not a particularly well-liked guy. But look at this. We all have to admit, this is a good tweet from Stuart Mandel. Okay. Stuart says, fearing an Indiana-Oklahoma City finals, the NBA is considering a plan where the Lakers and Celtics would get twice as many entries in the playoffs going forward and a double bye and twice as much of the postseason revenue. That is well played, Mr. Mandel, because that is a pretty perfect analogy. A pretty perfect analogy to what is going on. Fearing that you could get some other kind of team. We've got to set up our conferences to get double the amount of entries, more of the postseason revenue, and the buys. It's a good tweet, Stuart Mandel. I love it. Public sentiment clearly is shifting on this. Public sentiment is absolutely shifting. And, well, I love that. I'm not going to turn it away. I'm happy that these national sports writers are on board. I'm happy that the college football public at large seems to be on board with like, oh boy, we really are squeezing toothpaste out of the tube we can't put back in. And this is going to, maybe really ruin or adversely affect this sport that we know and love so much. Happy to have you here, guys. It's great. One problem, one frustration. You might be too late. Where was this in July of 2021? Where was this in July of 2021? You could have started the pushback when the greed of the SEC and Big Ten began, when the SEC took Texas and Oklahoma from the Big 12. At that time, in the national media, it was, at worst, cheerleading, grave dancing on the rest of the Big 12, like applauding this move, being excited by this move. Wow, this is going to make the SEC such a beast. This will be great. And at best, you had people that were just largely indifferent about this, not really that concerned about the Big 12. It's what spawned the Hateful Eight. Nobody gave a you-know-what about us. That's really why this channel started and became in earnest what it is, because nobody cared. Nobody cared. And when that stuff happened, it was very easy to see, like, guys, this is where it's going. This is the end game. We live in a capitalist country. We see how capitalism works and what happens, and you can extrapolate it out to where it's going to go if there are no regulations, which that's a whole other conversation. NCAA, college sports, not much in the way of good regulatory bodies that kept any of that stuff in check. So this is where it was going to go. And had there been pushback on this when that happened, or maybe even when USC and UCLA were poached from the Big Ten, or the Pac-12 rather, by the Big Ten, if there would have been more outrage and uproar at that point, maybe we could have stopped this sooner, because we're seeing this have a legitimate, as I've covered in the show, we're seeing this have a legitimate impact. The SEC now seems to be like, maybe we do need to really consider this 5+11 plan. Even though we have all the power, we could really do this if we wanted to. The pressure is working. It is having an impact. If this pressure could have started 4 years ago and we had that kind of head start, what could have been cut off at the pass? What could have been cut off from where we are actually now? Things could have changed. We could be living in a much different world, but the Stuart Mandels of the world were instead using their energy to write stories about how awful the TV contract was going to be for the Hateful Eight, the 8 teams left around, that they were going to have a TV deal worse than the AAC. Heather Dinich was busy throwing out tweets and stories with quotes from sources saying like, oh man, like the AAC could actually just take in the rest of these schools from the Big 12. Like the AAC would be the ones taking in those schools instead of the Big 12 taking in AAC schools. Like that's what people were spending their energy on at that point, instead of being like, hey, this isn't good and this is going to lead to a lot of bad things for our sport that were entirely predictable. And along the way, we've done things like, oh, I don't know, break up and destroy a conference that had been around for 100 plus years. One of the most history rich conferences in college football in the Pac 12. Guys, this could have been prevented had you have gotten on board sooner. But instead, at the time, it was like, and look, I try to be very, people will say, oh, you did it for clicks or whatever. Like, I get it. I'm in the game of like, if you're producing content, whether it's written, video, audio, whatever, you're producing content, you want to produce stuff that people will watch. And you're paying attention to what does get more traction. It affects us all to some degree. But if you really now are realizing that, like, man, this is a horrible thing and could actually threaten what I do eventually at some point if there's less and less interest in this thing, that was entirely predictable. And you could have changed your attitude on that earlier to have a more long-term view of this and smoothed some of this out. But instead, here we are now. I'm not going to turn them away. I'm happy that there are people here doing all of this now. I'm okay with it. Please continue. Stuart, more snarky tweets about the SEC and the Big Ten. That's great. It all does help. I won't turn that away. But that doesn't mean that I'm not still a little tweaked by this. Maybe I have forgiven you in some ways, but I have not forgotten about what happened back then, because that's how we got to where we are at right now. One last note on this. I mentioned that there is congressional pressure being put on again, and that's because we got another tweet from Congressman Brendan Boyle, who says, switch this for you, who says, let me state this as clearly as I can. The Big Ten and SEC should be very, very careful about some of the decisions they're about to make, because they appear hell-bent on ruining major college football. I think they need congressional hearings into their collusion. Collusion. I like that word, man. Put that up with the tortious interference claims from Bob Bowlesby, right? Tortious interference, collusion. Got some congressional pressure there. We've got Cody Campbell in a position of power on this presidential committee. If it ever gets off the ground and really happens, it's been confirmed now the SEC and the Big Ten are worried about that. We've had reporting through CBS and Yahoo about that being a real legitimate thing here. When I say the tide is beginning to turn, there has been a real impact. There's been a real impact over the last month, where instead of it just being the SEC and Big Ten steamrolling their way to everything they've wanted, there's at least a legitimate amount of resistance now. And a lot of things like attitudes are changing. So I have some optimism. I'm not gonna be naive enough to tell you, hey, everything is great, everything's fine, everything's fixed, it's gonna turn around. No, I'm not that naive. I understand the realities of the situation, but I am saying now's the time to keep that pressure turned up, because others are starting to, and it really is having an impact. It really is. So let's keep it going. Before I pop out of here, let's say hello to H. Dwayne Black. I appreciate you, my friend. Thank you for being here. Very dapper picture you've got there. I like that. He's putting everybody to shame, man. Nobody else has that. You're the man, John. Thank you, and go Tech. Hey, thank you. Thank you, H. Dwayne Black. Appreciate that, man. Guns up. You can get a guns up for that one. And guns up for the dapper attire that you have on there, my friend. Appreciate that. Thank you for being here. Guys, if you could please like the video and subscribe to the channel before you leave here, that would be amazing. I would very much appreciate that. Filled in quite nicely here tonight, so thank you for everybody who joined the show tonight. Let's see. Any other housekeeping? Oh, yes. Subscribe to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. OFBnews.com. That is OFBnews.com to get subscribed to the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter. 4,300 plus now reading it. And you'll get it straight to your inbox twice a week, totally for free. Appreciate everybody who does that. You're going to get one tomorrow morning in your inbox if you do go get signed up right now. So OFBnews.com, or click the link in the description of this video. And like I said, I am going to be out of town for the next couple of days, like Monday to, I'll be out through like Tuesday. So I should be back. We'll see about the only thing with Wednesday is that'll be my first day back, assuming that I can get a live show together. I will try to do a midweek show at some point next week. If there's some crazy breaking big story, maybe I can pop on while I'm gone, but I'm going to try not to. So anyway, thank you guys all for being here. Enjoy the rest of your week. Hope you have a great Friday, and I will talk to you all very soon. Take care.